Astrology allows us to understand how astral entities use us to produce loosh, which is their sustenance. I don't believe in astrology that predicts or tells us who we are, but rather in astrology that reveals how to exploit us from other dimensions. These entities make us co-producers of loosh. Our suffering and our unease are sustenance for them. To make us produce it, we must interact with each other, argue, criticize, desire, and disappoint one another. I'm not saying, "You're precious, so you operate this way." But I am astonished to see that, when someone's behavior is inconsistent, astrology sheds light on how they seem unknowingly programmed to act in a certain way, incomprehensible and, above all, harmful, likely to generate suffering in those around them. Thus, astrology cannot predict what will happen or define someone's psychological profile, but it does offer some insights into irrational behavior. The question is, should one be a good producer or not? The celestial realm has always presented itself as a god. There were many gods in the past, what we call polytheism, but at some point, one of them established itself as the sole authority, creating the first monotheism, Judaism, which only generated more conflict as it opposed the other gods, claiming superiority over them. Because at some point in ancient times, humans had finally come to an understanding, respecting each other's differences, thus avoiding the tensions, wars, and betrayals that threatened to force the gods to leave Earth due to a shortage of loosh. Asserting the existence of only one of them, as the sole legitimate one, allowed humans to fight each other again. This reignited tensions, and therefore human suffering. The earthly farm experienced a new boom. I have conducted several studies that illustrate this process, which I will present here in audio format for easier access. Whether or not we cause suffering to those around us is often determined by what makes us happy ourselves. When we nourish the astral plane, we experience a feeling of fullness, and otherwise, a sense of inner emptiness. We feel abandoned. Ideally, we should learn to tolerate this feeling, but it is very difficult. Only monks who have learned solitude in caves, deep in the Himalayas, in the Andes Mountains, or in a forest like the Amazon, manage it. Solitude is a good way to achieve it. The earth is an incredible mix of very different individuals, which leads us all to hate each other, generating a staggering amount of suffering, and therefore loosh. The more suffering we create around ourselves, the more full and content we feel ourselves, but it doesn't last, just a few hours, and then we have to produce more. We spend our lives yo-yoing between fleeting joys and unhappiness. To illustrate how the astral plane can employ elaborate strategies, one of the most common is to idealize someone, to see in them the promise of something they never promised, a lover, a husband, a mistress, a parent, or one of their children, and then discover that they fail to deliver. Every good flatterer depends on the one who listens to him, says La Fontaine's fable, The Crow and the Fox. Oh, how handsome you are, how beautiful you are! Truly, if your song resembles your plumage, you are the phoenix of these woods. This means that the fox convinces the crow that his voice is so beautiful that he should give him a demonstration of his delicate song and drop the cheese he has in his beak. At these words, says the fable, the crow is beside himself with joy. He opens his beak wide and drops his prey. The fox seized it and said to him, "Learn, my good lord, that every good flatterer's life depends on the one who listens to him. This lesson is surely worth a cheese. If you believe in the flattery of others, you will be robbed and suffer terribly afterward. For a moment of joy, you will have months, even years, of sorrow, depending on your level of spiritual awareness. But imagine a crow who has read La Fontaine. It doesn't open its beak, doesn't sing the expected melody. In this case, a second phase begins. The fox will say that the crow had promised him the cheese, or the beautiful song, which amounts to the same thing, but that he didn't keep his promise, that he betrayed him. There is no one more resentful than a former flatterer who thought he had you wrapped around his little finger with false flattery. Understand that in this, we are merely puppets of the astral plane, which itself is under the sway of other dimensions. Everyone, from the crow to the fox, is manipulated to play their part. What interests me here is studying the psychology we have been given to play our roles well, whether flatterer or flattered, fox or crow. Mimicry is the absolute guarantee for the astral plane. Don't think, don't reflect, the New Age crowd of all stripes tells you, follow your instinct. Be good crows, good foxes. The fox disappointed by a crow that doesn't open its beak is thus instinctively programmed to feel hatred. It is interesting to see how the astral plane will drive it to ensure that this hatred doesn't fade away. Imagine all the energy he must have expended to mislead you. For him, it's all a debt, and his astral body makes him believe you're the debtor. He made an effort to please you, flattering you, and you show him no gratitude. If he had tricked you, he would tell you he initiated you, and you show him no gratitude either. Through these strategies, which are ingrained in us from childhood, in our deepest selves, the astral body holds us captive, because all participants, both trickster and victim, will be producers of deception. I myself have often had to insist that I don't pretend to do this or that, but the tricksters needed me to say that I had. We can all experience this with someone in our physical circle or online. Through these means, the flattering fox initially experiences a sense of well-being, stemming from the feeling that the other will either save him by giving him his cheese, or, failing that, be at fault, thereby allowing him to unleash divine justice upon him. The fox then hopes that this other, the crow he initially flattered, now despised for not having the desired voice, will be hurt, will suffer from this incomprehensible and unjust contempt. But that is precisely the goal, to create confusion that generates suffering, and that the astral realm will be grateful. If it were true that the crow could feel guilty, there would be a double ration of loosh for the entities, a double production, and the fox hopes that the sole god of the moment will be grateful, granting him liberation from the anticipated suffering. The fox harbors hatred for his ungrateful crow, who refuses to give up his cheese or sing. This hatred produces a kind of loosh, which the astral plane is always served by, even if it doesn't necessarily serve the same god. He might hope that the crow also fell for the flattery, that he was the most beautiful, and that, discovering he is perceived as not having been generous enough to let himself be robbed, now that he himself has eaten the cheese, he might suffer from the unjust reproach, but that is precisely the point, to produce loosh in turn. It's amusing to analyze how the gods manage to always have, no matter what we do, an argument to present us as guilty or acting in bad faith. Asterisk. To point out his wrongdoing to the crow, the fox will use unsubstantiated accusations. That's how you recognize deception, such as, you contradict yourself, but without explaining why. We instinctively know to be wary of someone who flatters us, because they expect things in return that they don't say, and since they don't get them, they will feel betrayed, and therefore resentful. More loosh, this time from hatred, not resentment. These are different tastes, which I've enjoyed studying, and to which I will return. In exchange for this undue expectation, then, this good flatterer, the fox of the fable, can hope to be loved by the astral plane, which we call God, for good and loyal service, because he is an excellent producer of human suffering, in double, even triple the amount, hence of loosh, without realizing that, being such a good producer, the astral plane will always demand more from him. These entities are incapable of thought, even though they can employ highly sophisticated programs developed by other, more powerful dimensions. It's important to understand that other dimensions feed on the loosh produced, which is merely a raw material. I've researched this to understand its underlying logic, which I will discuss on this page. However, being favored by these entities doesn't guarantee peace and quiet, nor does it guarantee a well-deserved retirement for services rendered. On the contrary, it leads to being expected to produce even more. A good producer is always expected to produce more. If the fox, exhausted, ever manages to reduce the suffering it generates around it, the astral plane will make it pay, demanding compensation. It will be its own suffering that it will have to multiply tenfold, becoming a grumpy old man, able to produce only by itself, living in regrets and melancholic memories, if its weary entourage turns away from it. Meanwhile, our fox can reproduce and create new cubs, born from the same source, who will know how to flatter thousands of crows, make them sing and eat their cheeses, who haven't read Monsieur de La Fontaine. Thus, the loosh production farm regenerates itself. There were 2 billion humans around 1900. We are almost 9 billion today. How can we explain this massive expansion? I will dedicate some audio recordings to trying to discuss this one of these days.